it's great to have something that's environmentally beneficial, but people tend to only listen when it's economically beneficial. And
Mhm.
so in order for you to have that mass adoption, you need to make sure that you hit the economic green as well as the environmental green.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Clean Techies, the podcast. This is episode 31, and today we are sharing our discussion with John Walsh, the CEO and founder of Endera, which is a light commercial EV developer. John is probably, I would consider him a serial entrepreneur and definitely a very interesting fellow. Recently was awarded the Forbes 30 Under 30 title for 2022. And we discussed today his kind of story into climate tech, how he got there, as well as how he ended up deciding to found Endera, which is helping to decarbonize the light commercial vehicle industry. So very, very interesting stuff what we're talking about here. But before we get into the show, obviously you want to make, again, as always, mention and thank you to our sponsors, NextWave Partners. NextWave are experts in the talent acquisition and recruitment space across climate tech, renewables, and ESG globally. So if you are looking to make a career change or your team is growing, maybe you're specifically having a difficult time filling certain positions as the workforce is increasingly, talent is becoming increasingly scarce, please do reach out to NextWave to help you with those needs. You can reach them at next-wavepartners.com. That is their website. And you can also reach out to their consultants directly by finding one that's in your region or in your specialty on LinkedIn, so you can find them there as well. But again, NextWave, really, really competent people with some great market expertise. So without any further delay, let's get into the show.
All right, welcome to the show, John. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's jump right into it. Could you maybe give us a quick introduction to yourself, a little bit about some of your accomplishments? I know you have some recent news worth mentioning. So yeah, if you just want to give us kind of a little bit of an intro.
Yeah, sure. My name is John Walsh. I'm the founder and CEO of Endera. I started the company about 3.5 years ago, and we focus on commercial electric vehicles. Some of our core products being shuttle buses, school buses, as well as logistics trucks.
Got it. And so I guess I'm always curious to understand kind of what was the impetus, what ended up getting you started into this clean technology type of world?
Yeah, I was in private equity, actually. I was assigned to energy and transportation companies, and I got assigned to electric bus company. Got to learn the ins and outs of basically the overall EV market, which was in its infancy, 4 years ago, especially in the commercial side, and basically helped do business development. I was on the fund side. I was doing investment packaging, but I got dropped in to do business development and really got to learn the ins and outs of the EV space. And I felt that I could do it better, and build a better company. We've gone to the moon and back, right? So it's never the technology problems. It's always the people problems, right? So I left the company and I started Endera pretty much the next day. And here we are years later with hundreds of millions of dollars in backlog, a factory, nearly 100 employees. So definitely really excited where we came from.
Interesting. So could you maybe talk a little bit about, I'm curious to maybe understand the evolution. You mentioned it was in the early days especially for commercial trucks with electrification. Could you talk about the evolution from then to now, maybe some of the biggest issues that you think have been solved or that you guys have solved yourselves? I'm also keen to maybe hear about the supply chain side of things as well.
Yeah, I think, all of the above were in its infancy 5 years ago. The supply chain was not matured. The technology wasn't there fully. Costs were higher. Range was lower. The grid which is still pretty far behind. Couldn't handle DC fast charging. Charging infrastructure was also not unified. So people were using their own different charge ports, right? So you can imagine, having a world where Audi and BMW had their own gas nozzles. It's just as unpractical to have widespread adoption with EV unless you had a standardization of charging infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Also, in the commercial space, if you think about it, then there was like less than 1% of EVs out of just passenger cars. With commercial is even worse, right? So, that's really the area where, you see the adoption first is because it's a lighter vehicle. So in the commercial space, there really wasn't that much, mostly in the transit space where you had large municipal transit buses with federally funded contracts that didn't have as much of a price sensitivity as much as a political motivation to go EV. And so you saw some electrification of shuttle or of big transit buses in the early 2010, 2011. Now there's a huge economic inflection point where the total cost of ownership models are actually showing to be cheaper to operate an electric commercial vehicle than a gas one. And that's without subsidies. So that's a huge tipping point for us to where, it's great to have something that's environmentally beneficial, but people tend to only listen when it's economically beneficial. And so in order for you to have that mass adoption, you need to make sure that you hit the economic green as well as the environmental green.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's the entire, you hit it right on the head of when we talk about adoption there has to be a real reason because business people need a reason to, right? There is the environment, but there also needs to be the business case for it. I'd be curious, could you walk us through maybe step by step, what does it look like when people, like, for example, who might a client of yours be, a customer, and kind of what does the process look like? Are you refitting existing buses? Are you building things from scratch? Could you walk us through that process step by step?
Sure. So we're building complete end-to-end new electric vehicles. We don't convert old buses currently. So we're not necessarily in the repower market. We use a Ford Econoline platform though, and we electrify that, and then we build our bodies on it. So everything's the same. Everything's very familiar to our clients. Financing's there for it, which is huge to capturing an immediate cost savings with going electric. And you might have a slightly higher lease payment, but your fuel and maintenance costs go down by so much that your month over month overall costs are less for operating electric, which is the key. So some of our clients are airports, municipalities, corporate campuses, large corporations that need to shuttle their people from, one building to another, universities, and overall transportation associations. And we also have school bus platform as well. And so those are school districts and the like. Most of our contracts are government funded, or have some form of government backing. And, a lot of them have that top-down regulatory push to go electric, like in airports where you have these clean air emission requirements that preceded the pandemic. And so, we like to sit in this area. It's a very large niche, and there's a lot of government contracts that are supporting it. And so, we're seeing a greater adoption in that area.
Well, what is obviously there's the cost of the vehicles themselves, but what about the charging infrastructure that needs to be built in order to sustain and charge these vehicles on site? Is there a long process? How does that look to make that happen, and what are the costs associated there?
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely subsidies also supporting charging infrastructure. Biden infrastructure bill came out. There were previous grants and opportunities for that. We employ two models. I mean, we're happy to give you, the charging infrastructure you need to support your fleet for the vehicles you're purchasing from us. But we also have what is a more favorable charging as a service model, where we fund and finance all of the infrastructure necessary to support your fleet. And basically it's a lumped in metered price that still allows you to be net present value positive or have a favorable total cost of ownership over gasoline. You just don't have to deal with the infrastructure component of electrification. What's beautiful about commercial fleets is it's all planned, right? You have this fleet that has this power requirement, requires this infrastructure, right? And so mapping that out is all planned. When you're dealing in the public world with the retail side of passenger vehicles, there's a very erratic route characteristic of that type of vehicle. Right. I mean, you might go to Yosemite, you might go to Palm Springs, or you might go to San Diego, and you want to have that adequate level of charging needed. And you also have a certain time sensitivity because you're benchmarking the time it takes to charge to gas, right? That there's that impatience that really ensues with passenger vehicles. For the commercial space, it's all about maximizing your total cost of ownership, right? Or minimizing it. And so you don't want to charge too fast. You don't want to charge too slow. You want to charge just right. Electric vehicles are like people. The person who eats faster versus the person who eats slower, who's going to live longer, right? So batteries are similar to that, where the slower you charge it, the longer the batteries last. And so for us, when we're looking at a fleet that we're electrifying, we make sure that we size the charging network accordingly to minimize that total cost of ownership. So you don't want to have too big of a charge. It's going to cost too much money. That's going to charge it too fast. It's going to degrade the battery faster. You want to hit it just right so that when it's not being used, it can charge, which is also good for the grid.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that it really, if you guys are doing the financial model, that comes down to making it just the levelized cost of the vehicles. That makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people are always concerned about, like, what is this going to cost me? They're afraid of maybe the changes that are going to happen. Maybe that's a good thing to kind of segue into, is when somebody implements these changes and does a fleet, are they typically changing the entire fleet right away? Do they start small and then kind of adapt over time? Are there a lot of changes to their day-to-day operations? Like, what are some of those things that look like, and how do you support them through those changes?
Sure. Some do, some don't. We have clients that have chosen to do a complete electrification swap, which is fine. It's all in the planning. When you've got 3 months plus, especially in a COVID world, to get permits for charging stations and charging infrastructure, you've got to plan that right to the production so that when the vehicles arrive, they can charge. And some prefer a phased approach, right, where they do part of their fleet. Part of that has to do with the government mandates. Part of that has to do with the aggressive level of the intent to go electric, how serious they are. And so some we've seen complete fleet swap, whereas others it's a phased approach.
Got it. And what does it look like for, say, for example, obviously these commercial fleets tend to have a team of maintenance techs on hand. Like, what does it look like for the transition of them, working on a traditional ICE vehicle into the electric vehicle side?
Yeah, good question. There's a lot less to do. I mean, there's a lot less moving parts, a lot less fluids. Friction is good for EV, recharges the batteries. So brakes are, 70,000 miles plus. And so, tires are really the main maintenance element. And so it definitely puts a risk to the service and maintenance industry in terms of, the traditional OEMs revenue sources, or just general maintenance shops, because it's significantly less. With a gas fleet, you're about like 10 cents a mile, can even go up, right, when you're dealing with old fleets. For EV, you're about like 3 cents a mile, and the majority of it's software updates, right? And
Mm.
so all of our vehicles are equipped with a 5G network, and so we send automatic push updates, right? When there's something that goes down, a lot of times we'll know about it before, right? And so our 24/7 service center will have that information, and we'll be able to automatically send a push update before the client even knows there's something wrong. And if they do notice something's wrong, you know, they call our call center and we try to troubleshoot it, send a software patch, right? Or it'll be dispatched to one of our 2,600 service locations across the country, and there'll be some mechanical work done if needed. But to go from 10 cents to 3 cents a mile, right? That's a huge reduction in maintenance, and that's one of the larger costs of operating the fleet. Of course, then the power, right, which goes down by a similar factor as well.
Yeah, I think this is interesting. There's a couple things. Obviously, it's fascinating that I'd be curious what percentage of problems that arise are just software updates that you can handle remotely versus like mechanical.
The majority.
Yeah, okay, I figured so. It's probably the most. And then I would maybe be keen to hear your thoughts, maybe on a broader scale, with the service model for these different vehicles. Like I know that there tends to be a lot of discussion around the lack of finding skilled like manual labor for these mechanical people in general. I know that the same issue is true of skilled labor to build homes and construction. So I'm curious if this is actually, some people might see this as a threat. Like where I'm from, the quote unquote blue collar workers would probably be up in arms about this. But maybe out in California, for example, I'm not sure what the landscape is. Is this actually solving a problem? And could you maybe speak to what you think could be done with hypothetically, all that talent that could then go somewhere else, if there is talent in that space that can be more productive in another way?
Yeah. Well, I mean, overall, job retraining is definitely, something that I think is always good in an ever evolving information age and economy with, technologies disrupting ways of doing business. Right now, there's such a labor shortage that, uh, you know, finding a job where they can still use their trade does not seem to be an issue.
Mm-hmm.
We'll take all the mechanics and techs we can get, right? And so, internally, in terms of securing that labor, it's about providing competitive employment offerings, favorable work environment, and stellar culture, right? Part of what we pride ourselves on is having this cult-like culture where everybody is ride or die Endera. And so fostering that and making it a great place to work is how we attract good talent. But I do believe that there's still a significant amount of workforce opportunity in other areas besides maintenance that will be a better productive use to society than fixing old gas vehicles.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. Obviously, many people are they're apprehensive of the change. They don't like there's not they're like they've been in this way for a long time. They're in this career for 20 years. But I think that to me, the companies like Endera will play a big role in actually helping people to make that transition, right? Because they can take existing talent and then train them into these new areas. I think that's going to be fascinating. Um, to maybe switch gears a little bit, I'm curious to understand your take on kind of regulation in the space in general. I know that, for me personally, I'm not always a fan of government regulation, but I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on how it has helped the adoption curve, maybe some of the pitfalls you've seen where incentives were misaligned. I'm just kind of curious to hear your overall thoughts.
Sure. It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think that technology transfer is supposedly the intended purpose of government subsidies in an area that is lacking in adequate levels of capital and innovation to economically stand on its own 2 feet. And I think that there have been programs that have helped. I think there's also, a lot of issues with programs that are out there, particularly the point of sale voucher programs that are so focused on preventing fraud that they actually block out really, good deals and companies that are trying to, do better for our planet by, having clean air vehicles on the road. The California Air Resources Board HVIP program is an example. When there was not a lot of demand for electric vehicles, they were great. The voucher programs didn't run out. There was a lot of flexibility in the program to accommodate a lot of change and variability that an immature industry faces, right? And now, given the pandemic switch of, demand, right? Literally overnight, the programs are underfunded and they are militant about trying to find any little reason to void your vouchers. So they're somewhat working against you, right? And this is, keep in mind, the organization that found out the VW mitigation scandal, right? So they're constantly, suspicious and skeptics by nature, which is good for society, but not when it blocks good deals from happening or the program becomes broken. That, for example, 13 minutes the voucher programs ran out. It's like Coachella tickets. It comes out at midnight, the computer crash, right? And so you can't even type fast enough the voucher forms before they run out. That's not right. And so then you're getting people that are also gaming the system because of that. And they provide these measures to prevent those exact things, right? So it is truly backwards, right? In a lot of situations where, people can't get vouchers reserved, right? And then you have the Electrify America program, which was because VW did cheat on their emission standards, they had to allot billions of dollars to electrify America. Now, that program in its early stages was good because it standardized charging infrastructure, right? As I said, we now have CCS as the as the adopted Western standard. However, they have these voucher programs to basically take diesels off the road. Well, the problem with that is that it has to be a 2010 diesel or older. There's very few of those on the road. And then if you have this diesel fleet, you have to have been registered for years, right? So the vehicle has to have been in your name and registered for 2 years, right? So I can't go and buy a fleet of diesels, scrap them, and then apply that to new clients who those fleets, they didn't have those gas fleets, right? And so the majority of the program has been untapped as a result. So again, preventing fraud has resulted in a lack of deployment of capital to achieve their initiatives. And so bureaucracy and regulation absolutely gets in the way of being able to, deploy these vehicles. But, for us, we're focused on building the best vehicles at the lowest cost, and as many of them as possible, because we believe that regardless of these subsidies, the wave is here. It's to stay. It's only accelerating, right? People will buy these vehicles without the subsidies, which is a good leading indicator. And we're just going to have to manage with these programs, as long as possible. But our goal is continue to drive that price down, because we are seeing it be cheaper to go electric without subsidies, which is, again, the purpose of technology transfer, is to get from an immature technology that is not economically viable on its own 2 feet to an economically viable product that we believe is better for society. And I believe we're there, and it's only improving.
Yeah, I think that's exciting. I mean, obviously, it's always interesting to see, for example, I think solar is always a great example, right? People were so skeptical of solar, like saying how expensive it is, but it's obviously severely cheaper now to build solar than it is to build conventional power plants. So I think that it's always interesting once you reach that inflection point. Many people forget that that's the whole point, right? You have to get the efficiencies to that point where it is cheaper. So I'd actually be keen to maybe hear a little bit about you mentioned that you guys are manufacturing now. So you look at companies like Tesla that started out obviously probably extremely inefficient in their process, but as the years go on, they've made some of the most interesting, at least very fascinating to me, improvements in their manufacturing process. Can you talk to like what you've seen from when you guys started to where you are now, and what you expect to those improvements to continue being going forward?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing continuous improvement in battery cell density, in overall supply chain maturity, and being able to have more available components. And for us, it's about stabilizing our supply chain, right? When we first started the company, we were, there was more reliance on outside integrators, right, and outside parties that, and that we faced challenges with that, right, and just having a stable supply chain. And so, making sure you forge strong supplier relationships, making sure that you secure your supplies to handle not only the immature EV supply chain, but just the overall supply chain crisis that's going on in the United States, where the ports are backed up and people can't get basic raw materials, right? And you're risking inflationary pressures as well. And so for us, bringing things in-house, vertically integrating, and stabilizing our supply chain is core to our strategy, which is what Tesla did as well.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because obviously, like, manufacturing, it's a super, super tough thing no matter what you're manufacturing. And from what I've noticed on talking to people on this podcast, there's a lot of these solutions that we need to create are, hard technology, right? They're hardware. So I'd be keen. You mentioned supply chain. I think this has come up a few times. I've seen people discussing on Twitter with the supposed lack of resources available to continue this massive consumption of materials to create batteries. Could you maybe talk to that a little bit if you have any insight on, what the next, per se, I guess you could say, gaps or issues might be that we'll run into in the next 2 to 5 years, and then the solutions in the long term?
Sure. So in terms of battery materials, right, at the element level, there's significant shortages in nickel and cobalt. So for NMC battery packs, there's, I think, a lot of shortage risk. There's price inflation risk just due to scarcity overall. I watched an interesting lecture actually, and they were talking about the overall transportation landscape and how we don't physically have enough batteries to electrify the entire transportation landscape, which is why and also due to certain classes of vehicles having very long duty cycles, there's a question of the practicality of EV in a lot of different segments, particularly the Class 8 segment, where like even the Tesla Semi, right, which is yet to come out 4 years, later, is, they said they're gonna have like 600-mile range. I don't know where they put the packs, maybe inside the, the box. But now then having a supercharger, right, that's still going to take a lot of time to charge, whereas a gas vehicle, you have 1,200 miles to fill up, and the fill up takes 15, 20 minutes. I believe you're going to see hydrogen in that area, right? Hydrogen hybrid, with electric, but hydrogen seems to make the most sense in terms of a scarcity perspective and amount of energy needed to move that amount of weight around the country and to have the range required. And gas stations can very well become hydrogen stations. And so you have kind of drop-in fuel replacement capability to make sure that the very large class of vehicles can transition to clean energy. For the medium duty, we believe that electric is the way to go, because you have that favorable, total cost of ownership model. Also, when we're going back to battery chemistry, there's a bunch of lithium, right? So there's lithium all around the world, and we're not necessarily in a scarcity shortage to the same degree as we are with nickel and magnesium. NMC battery chemistries are much higher density, which is why they've been historically used in the commercial space, especially when you're in the integration world and you're dealing with already pre-existing confined chassis structures that the OEM set when they were pumping out gas vehicles. It hasn't been optimized for electric. You're going to see you've seen a lot of NMC being used. LFP, however, which is this lithium-based chemistry, has more abundance, right? And so, and it's less dense, but it can still satisfy the medium-duty space. So I believe in certain segments of commercial transportation and overall transportation, you're going to see electrification be the preferred solution. And then in the areas where it's really impractical, I believe it's going to go straight to hydrogen. And then, you're going to see a lot more LFP. In China, LFP is dominant. In the US, it doesn't exist really. There's maybe small applications, but it doesn't really exist. It's, especially in the commercial space, it's NMC. But in China, where, they're 10 years ahead of us in electrification, you're seeing majority LFP for commercial. So if we transition to lithium-based chemistries for the smaller classes of vehicles and then hydrogen for the larger classes, I believe we can adequately convert our transportation network to clean energy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, sometimes I think about too the fact that, obviously when we think about transferring the entire automotive industry from ICE vehicles over to electric, we also got to think about the fact that the whole goal isn't to have exactly as many cars, right? Why can't we have better cities? Why can't we have just fewer cars on the road in general? It doesn't have to be as many. I know, being from a rural area, anybody listening would say that's absolutely ridiculous. We can't do that. But I think there's definitely ways that will be innovated, which actually is an interesting point to think about, right? There's so many technologies that have been created over the years. I was just listening to a podcast today that talked about this, where if supply chain issues arose, oftentimes they fixed it by new technology, right? They came up with other ways to deal with it. I think it was the example of the color TV initially. I don't remember the science behind it. I'm not good at science, but basically they identified there was a shortage to be had, and we still have color TV today. So different technology, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's maybe shift a little bit to, generally speaking, I want to talk more about the entrepreneurship journey you've went in with climate tech in general. So could you walk us through, once you made the decision to go do this, what was your idea here? How did you start, especially with a manufacturing business? What was your first MVP? What was your thought about raising funding? Could you just walk us through kind of that story and, go ham and tell us everything you want to tell?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I started 2 clean tech companies prior to this company, and a big lesson learned was I always came up with an idea, try to fit a market, try to fit a product. There's a lot of assumptions that go on behind that. And if you take your assumptions as incontrovertible truths, you are posing a huge risk to the success of your company, because it has not been validated by someone who is willing to buy. And so big lesson learned for me there. And so when starting this company, I really focused on the contracts. I focused on, identifying that market need, right? And so I really took a consultative approach to our pilot clients and really said, tell me what you want, right? I'm not going to tell you what you need. I want you to tell me what you want. And then, let's build this together. And so the beauty of that is that you have this amazing product market fit that really just fits like a glove when you let that lead you, right? And you get that opportunity, and then you know exactly the requirements of what you need to build in order to have a successful product. So taking that approach was really how we scaled Endera so quickly. And we started very lean, right? Where it was subcontract manufacturer business model where we work with a bodybuilder, we work with, a powertrain integrator, we work with, a chassis dealer and an AC company. And we set up the design hub, right? And so that was how we were able to get our initial products out on the market, right? And we basically had an exact roadmap with pilot clients to understand what those requirements were that we needed to meet. And so we went out and had a bunch of different partners to get that built. But again, like I said, what unearthed was the supply chain challenges, and scaling that model became cumbersome. And so, those initial contracts, though, acted as a platform, and that initial toehold into the market, which is everything you need for a company to succeed. It doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you end up. And having that one toehold of an opportunity to have proof of life, you can pivot and evolve into being whatever your grandiose vision is, right? But starting with that one opportunity is kind of how you build that momentum. And so after having that and having this initial model, we raised funding, right? And then we purchased a manufacturing company. They're a school and shuttle bus OEM out of Ohio. And by having those, and so we kind of actually, we rolled into something, right? Because we bought a manufacturing company, which gave form to make, and it gave us the foundation to make that company how we wanted it to be, right? It's a lot harder just scaling up a manufacturing plant, right? Than it is to buy a manufacturing company, gut it, shape it, restructure it, reshift it, and then scale it to what you want, because it has the bare bones. And so that was one step in our vertical integration, right? And then, the second step was in taking our powertrain in-house, right? Where, we now do all the electrification. So we're the only company in the electric cutaway and school bus space as a US manufacturer that is vertically integrated, right? And so all of those helped alleviate certain supply chain issues that we had with the different vendors, and it allowed us to have more control of our own destiny. And so that's where we are today.
Interesting. So maybe curious to understand, what year did you raise funding?
Started, 2020.
Okay, got it. So beginning of 2020. I'm just curious because I like to look at the timelines. Obviously, some of the clean tech people I've talked to tried to raise funding after the.
But yeah, we started around.
Okay, interesting. So I guess what was the maybe process like? Because I know I've talked to some climate tech VCs on here, and it seems like there's just money being tossed at the wall. Was it difficult? What were the big questions that they had? I'm just kind of curious in general that process. What was that like?
Yeah, well, raising money is, it's an art, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. Some would call it fun, some would not. But, questions around economic viability is huge, right? I mean, the fact that it is cheaper to operate than gas without subsidies and that our model and strategy provide for that is compelling. And so ensuring that is important. Questions around supply chain and how we're going to mitigate risks was huge. Huge questions we got. Making sure that, we have a competitive moat around our company that is going to withstand, the ever evolving market forces is huge, right? Which is part of why our vertical integration strategy resonated. I think overall total addressable market size and opportunity is definitely something that, they want to see, right? How big of a ocean are we swimming in here? You know, and then, you know, overall the types of revenue streams that we can can employ with our business model, right? I mean, you know, software as a service, energy management as a service, charging as a service, vehicle sales, maintenance contracts, financing income. There's a whole host of different revenue streams that you can get when you sell that electric vehicle. A huge amount of economic stimulus is generated when you do that. And so our strategy is just being focused and, you know, providing as much of the ancillary services as possible, but really, you know, focusing on that competitive mode.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so once you kind of were in the process of raising or basically wrapping it up, I'm assuming there was, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was probably a large push to probably hire a lot of people. Is that correct?
Oh yeah.
So when you did that, was there like, how did you feel about this? Because obviously coming from probably a relatively tight team to having to scale up quickly, I'm curious as a founder, I've just been fascinated by this in general. Is like the mindset shift to, first of all, please investors, make sure you make the opportunity. It's like lightning struck, so you need to make sure that you take advantage of that. How did that feel, and how were you able to make sure that your core team still felt like they were being taken care of and you were still able to attract talent?
Yeah, aligning interests is a core, you know, thing you need to do with all stakeholders to ensure that the boat rows in the right direction and that everybody's rowing in the same fashion to make it move as fast as possible through this, you know, ocean of opportunity that we're trying to fish in. And, you know, making sure that everybody at Endera gets stock, you know, from the line worker to the CFO, right? And so making sure everybody's equitized is important. And then making sure that you have a culture where people feel valued, where people feel heard, where there's free flow of ideas that due to scaling management structures, that innovation does not get stifled and communication continues to flourish, right, across the organization. The big challenge when you scale really quickly is you know, bumping into each other and having adequate levels of communication necessary to accomplish your goals, and also being focused. And so making sure that, you know, you have that is critical, right? And so, you know, anybody can talk to me about an idea. It doesn't matter where you sit, right? And that's just a culture that's instilled. Whereas in some organizations, it's offensive to that individual's manager to go ahead of them and speak to me. But that is, no, that does not even exist at our company, right? And so it's a balance of, you know, having a flat structure and making sure it's not chaotic, right? Because you need some structure. But scaling is all about pushing decisions downwards, right? You know, to operate efficiently. And so, you know, definitely those are challenges that, you know, every organization scaling, you know, as fast as we are would face.
Interesting. And then maybe still on the talent thread, what has finding talent been like? Because I'm assuming that there's probably a lot of overlap from maybe some of the other backgrounds. Are you tending to get people who are maybe more junior, who have kind of a very strong interest in the space? Are you pulling people from other companies that are senior? Maybe they're just electrical engineers that worked on, you know, maybe work for Tesla or something like that are coming in. I'm just curious to see where you've been pulling talent from and how that works. And also your long view in terms of if this, as this continues to grow, are the universities feeding talent to not just you, but all of the companies that are going to be in the space?
Yeah, I mean, we have partnerships with multiple universities to continue to feed talent to us. You know, again, that culture and those alignment of interests and incentives and competitive compensation packages are huge to ensuring you have talent, especially in this market. You know, yeah, I mean, we do have, you know, team members from Tesla and, you know, a lot of other top EV companies, you know, but making sure that you have that influx of talent is super important.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm fascinated by the education space in general. I feel like I maybe don't give it too much credit as I should, but I think it tends to be behind the times. But I know that they've appeared to be doing a decent job because I've talked to a lot of founders. They've all said that they're kind of stepping up to the plate. So awesome. Well, I think maybe just kind of a couple of closing thoughts here from you. If you have any specific things you want to share, but I'd be keen to hear your advice to other entrepreneurs in the clean tech, climate tech space, what you'd recommend they focus on if they're maybe not sure what exactly they want to do, but they're just passionate about, just your general advice for those people.
Yeah. I mean, I don't give up, right? Don't get discouraged if you're presented with failure, present failure. I mean, fail fast, fail often. I had a mentor who wrote a book about that. Be a constant skeptic of your idea and try to be proven otherwise. A lot of people come up with their idea and they think it's the greatest thing. And then they get confirmation biased when they try to go and do customer development to validate that their product is worthy of economic viability. Well, the client's going to tell you that, right? And so try to be proven wrong. Your ideas are nothing more than a hypothesis, right? And you want to treat it as this experiment, right? So doing, I like IDEO has a great little packet on this, right? Innovation exercises, right? Where it's like, you can do observational exercises where you're just seeing how your clients are behaving by being a bystander. You're also acting out how your clients would behave. There's a lot of things you can do to just get that positive indicator that's unbiased to validate your idea. And so focusing on that first when you have an idea is super important. And being that constant critic and then being proven wrong is the best feeling in the world, right? And that way that you're going off with some valid truths, right? Because I've seen entrepreneurs go off on this journey, spend a bunch of money, some mortgage their house off of their own assumptions, and then it ruins them. Whereas if you take the blueprint, right? Like Steve Blank, the father of the lean model, is with the business model canvas and business model generation are great blueprints to constantly testing your business model, to undergoing the right order of operations to ensure your startup's a success, and then be unemotional about it, right? If it doesn't work, don't take it personally, right? I personally did this. I was, pursuing a startup probably a year longer than I should have, but it was my ego, my pride of telling people that this was going to succeed and that, I just took it as an incontrovertible truth that it was really hard emotionally to get over that first startup. But if you do that, if you, take an unemotional lie and you take a scientific approach to it, once you find that validation, then you've really got something, right? And then put all fire on it.
Yeah, all systems go, ludicrous speed. Yeah, awesome. Very good. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the pod today, John. We'll definitely have to have you on again. This is super exciting what you're doing. Congratulations on Forbes 30 under 30. And looking forward to seeing what you guys do.
Thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode. Really hope you enjoyed the conversation with John. I just personally find it extremely fascinating, the struggles that he must go through on a daily basis as they are building not only a startup in general, but a hardware startup and even on top of that, an EV startup, right? Building cars is not something easy. I know they're using components right now and retrofitting, but I think as they go forward, this is going to be very fascinating to see what they do. So if this, by the way, is your first time here, please do subscribe for more episodes. And of course, do share this with somebody who you think might value it. If you would value this topic or could implement this technology for your fleet, feel free to reach out to John, of course, or share it with somebody who might find it interesting. We want to make sure we're kind of getting this information put around to people who could use it. So thank you again for listening. We also ask that, of course, if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, please give us a review. Helps us to get further reach. And of course, you can get more involved if you like by joining our Slack channel or reaching out to me directly on Twitter with questions. And of course, as always, you can subscribe to the newsletter, which comes out monthly and discusses different climate tech things. It comes out on the 27th of every month. And I guess one last thing for next week, please be standing by for. We have an interesting conversation with Candice Ammori from OnDeck. She's helping run the climate partnership. So helping people to get from conventional work into climate tech, especially transitioning jobs. Not an easy thing to do, and definitely something we really need increasingly more of as the number of jobs in climate tech continues to rise, and the amount of talent there is to fill those jobs is obviously continuing to shrink because everybody's taking new opportunities. So really interesting conversation, a little different than what we've had in the past, but really I think will be quite interesting to have. So join us next week to hear that. And once again, thank you so much for listening to Clean Tech is the Podcast. We'll see you next week.